Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Saturday morning show. Damage or wear and tear? Which counts as which? And what can you claim back? That's what we're going to be talking about this morning. Myself, Kieran, my letting agent Kieran, and we're going to put questions to you, Jim, because, well, you're an investor and a landlord, and you have been for some time. So
I thought I was just done for a free gig. I didn't
this could be
realise I
quite
had to
good.
work
So,
for this.
and I think recently we just retrained with Safe Deposit Scotland, which is all about obviously claiming against the deposit in situations where there is damage or wear and tear and things as well. So we need to keep up to date with that continually to make sure that we know the best ways for claiming against the deposit if need be when it comes to damage to the property or whether it just comes under wear and tear. So we're really going to delve into that today, and it'd be interesting to hear your point of view, Jim, as a landlord investor and us as the agent. Is it just me or Jim, is your sound went?
No, I can't hear him either.
Jim, we
I
can't
don't know
hear
if it
you.
was me.
There you go. What about that?
There we
I
go.
didn't know what about that. So we missed all of that there.
Is
I
that
didn't know if
way
it was
up?
my connection.
Are we back online? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, so as an investor and as a landlord, as I was saying, it's from my point of view, I don't understand what happens in the dynamics between the property getting rented and the management of the properties because I'm not there in the detail and the minutiae. So as a landlord and investor, I often think to myself, it's like a brand new car. You give somebody a brand new car, like you give them their house, all refurbished completely. And in 5 years' time, you expect it back, probably exactly like you gave them it.
Well,
But
that's and it's a kind
there's a lot
it's
of
a bit of
landlords out
misconception.
there. Let me finish. There's a lot of landlords out there that actually believe that to be true and factual. When in actual fact, I'm now beginning to realise over a period of time, it's like, it's like anything, it's got to wear and tear. If you're doing 60 to 100,000 miles in a car, you can't, for a person you're leasing it to, the car, you can't expect the car to be returned to you in brand new condition. I once came across this. Andrew Forrester in Leaving. He was a car salesman. Now, obviously, you know what car salesman, the reputation that goes with that. But he was a car salesman, and I had bought a car from him, and it wasn't the greatest car, but I brought it back to him, and I continually complained about things that were going wrong with the car. And he said to me at one point, Jim, what do you expect for £1,000? It's like, do you expect a brand new car? Because if it is, it's £9,000. And I went, okay. I never really thought it like that before. And that's that's how I think you have to take account as a landlord or investor. The approach to, is it damage or is it actually wear and tear? And we're going to discuss about exactly what that is. So any landlord investor out there will completely understand how to tackle this the next time they come across it.
Yeah, you're definitely right, and I think you really need to take that into consideration, and we'll go into it in a lot more detail as we go through. But and you know things like carpets and things in a property is a really big one. People think anything happens to a carpet, you get a whole new one. That's not the case, and we'll talk about where that falls in between wear and tear and damage. But it's like you say, Jim. It's like when you bump into maybe old friends or people you were at school with and things. It's like you recognise that they've aged, and it's the same with your rental property. They'll look a little bit older when you get them back at the end of a tenancy. More than likely, depending on the length of the tenancy and things. And if you've not seen the property for a while, the difference can be quite jarring if you've not seen it for that period of time. And that's where obviously inspections and things come in quite well. But regardless of whether properties are owned or whether they're rented, all homes age over time. But when you see yours all the time, like your own home, sometimes you could become a wee bit complacent and you miss and you live with the gradual wear and tear, and that's just part of daily life. But you need to realise that that happens in a rental property as well, because it's people's homes as well, not obviously just because you're not in it. So while most tenants do return their property in excellent condition, some are less considerate, and accidents, of course, will also happen. So it's smart to move yourself, obviously, and arm yourself with the answers to questions like, does it count as damage? What is considered as fair wear and tear? How can you minimise the risk of damage in the property? What do you need for a valid claim? That's when we'll talk about inventories and Safe Deposit Scotland scheme. And how does the whole claim process work through the deposit scheme as well? And this is all covered in the blog that's attached to this show today, and that's what we're going to cover. And it will really boost your knowledge and protect you and your property to make you have a successful claim if you need to, and if you're in the event of a dispute, how to handle that correctly.
Absolutely. Karen, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. We have a lot of landlords that have a false expectation of what their property is going to be like when they get it back. So it's good to obviously help people understand what's all involved in receiving their property back and what's all involved in a claim, for example, because it is a very lengthy process. There's a lot involved in it, and a lot of people don't realise what goes into making a claim if need be at the end of a tenancy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time it's a fairly simple process to go through if there's not damage or there's not extensive deterioration to the property, and we then have to look at whether it is wear or tear or damage and things. So Karen, tell us a wee bit about what actually counts as damage.
So if we were to sum up damage, it would be something that counts as deliberate or accidental negligence towards your property, which is being caused by either the tenant or their visitors. So
that's a big one. Sorry, visitors as well. It's not always just the tenant, and I've seen that over the years, and it's people coming into the home that don't actually live there that have caused damage, or that's where this extra, the traffic on carpets and walkways and things have happened because there's extensive use of that because of the visitors. So yeah, that's a good point.
And that's the thing, it's not just visitors as well. You've got visitors, children, pets. There's a whole different factors that come into it as to who can cause damage to a property. So although we can't cover every possible eventuality for it in this article, then obviously we do have some pointers of what would usually count as damage. So this is assuming they are covered within your tenancy agreement. So making sure you have the right agreement in place in the first place is one of the key points here as well. So causing appliances to break down throughout the lack of care. So this can be things such as including the defrosting of a freezer, a washing machine not descaling it as well, and also not cleaning cooker hoods or extractor fans. And this can be one of the biggest ones. Obviously, extractors, cooker hoods, they are one of the biggest ones that we see at the end of the tenancy because people become complacent, don't clean them, and then at the end it's a whole job. And it can be quite expensive to get a professional oven clean done as well. So keeping on top of these small things throughout a tenancy can result in you getting your deposit back because they're not things that are going to have to be claimed off again at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, I know your model, for all your properties, you have integrated oven, hob, and extractor, which I totally agree with, because at least when somebody moves in, they have the cooking facilities that are available, but you tend not to do other appliances unless needed. But
purely down to a taxation reason, because the fact that the wear and tear allowance was taken away. So the wear and tear allowance was a really generous allowance the government gave, over 10% right across your top line revenue. So it was a really good tax deduction, but now the wear and tear allowance doesn't exist, and it's just a replacement. They worked it out. Obviously, they were going to get more revenue, so they thought, we'll just take away the wear and tear allowance, and we'll actually just put it on the replacement value, and that's it, really. So it's difficult to just talk about deliberate or accidental. I actually see, here's a classic example of deliberate, and a lot of people don't understand this. The tenant was actually given the property with unblocked drains. In other words, all the drains were perfect. The toilet was perfect. Everything's working. The sewer was fine outside. And then all of a sudden they phone up and say, my drain's blocked. Okay, so how did it block? And then you get the drain person out, and then they go, well, it's nappies, or it's, and I've seen that happen. It's nappies, or it's wet wipes, or it's, sanitary towels and stuff like that down the toilet, and not doing anything like that. And it only leads from one property. It's our property. And then the tenant says, but why am I liable for that? Well, you're the one that blocked the toilet.
Yeah.
But they actually think the landlord's responsible for doing it. Now, under the Standard Repair Act, the landlord's responsible for unblocking it if that's the case. But it's chargeable to the tenant as far as I'm concerned, because it's negligence. It's the tenant's use that's caused the problem. Yeah. So it can be accidental. Here's another one as well, a classic example. There's water ingress coming in from the top of the ceiling, and it's constantly coming in. Your tenant reports it straight away when it happens. Is that accidental, or is that the tenant's liability?
That's accidental.
Yeah, absolutely. But what if the tenant then leaves it for 6 months and doesn't actually say anything about it at all?
That's the tenant's responsibility.
Negligence.
Yeah. And that's what most tenants don't realise. They don't actually realise that leaving the place damp and not reporting it in some shape or form. Now, if you're a tenant, report it in writing somewhere, put it on an email and send it to your property management company or your landlord, because I'll tell you what, some landlords would, unfortunately, we've not all got fantastic minds. We've not all fantastic record keepers. Therefore, some landlords and letting agents will actually forget if you don't actually put it in writing. So you have to make sure your liability is passed on, and that's why you put it in writing as a tenant, to make sure that you're no longer liable and you're no longer negligent in that situation, because you've reported it as quick as you can. This goes back to the insurance companies, because the insurance companies do it flip side the other way as well. If you flood downstairs accidentally, okay, downstairs' insurance is going to have to pay for that. It's not upstairs that pays for it. And yet, wait a minute, but you flooded my downstairs. Surely you've been paying for that. No, your insurance has got to cover it. That's how they work. But if you're negligent upstairs and you continually flood and leave it, and it continually gets damaged over a period of time, then your insurance has to pay for it, because you're now negligent as far as the insurance company is concerned. Because you see how that happens. The insurance company obviously realizes that no one wants to be negligent, and everybody will fix it when they're meant to be fixing it. So that's the least liability for them. So that's how they work like that.
Yeah, a lot. That's quite often people get confused with that one. If there's been a leak or whatever, downstairs always automatically assumes, it's upstairs that needs to sort this, upstairs insurance, and it's not. That's why it's so important to have your own insurance as a landlord and as a tenant as well, your contents insurance.
That's why having a great insight as a letting agent and being able to manage that situation effectively, and it is an easy one to get away with, because all you need to do is, look, I'll just take your details, I'll pass them on to my insurer or my loss adjuster, and they'll contact you and get in touch with you. Now, the loss adjuster then just goes straight back to them and goes, by the way, it's no our liability, because it's not negligent. And then their insurance, they get on, go hell for leather at their insurance, and their insurance goes, they're absolutely right. Job done. Yeah. All the flack's taken off of you. You're no longer in the firing line, and that's how to skillfully manage that situation.
Yeah, definitely. What other areas count as damage then, Karen?
So these are some of the most common ones that we end up seeing at the end of a tenancy. So such as burn marks on a worktop, anything that have marked burns. So when it comes to things such as irons, saucepans, hair straighteners is probably one of the worst ones that we see.
Straighteners and irons on the carpets, that you see often.
And obviously, if your property is non-smoking, obviously it does count when there's tobacco and smells and discolouring. This will obviously count as well if your property is, again, coming back to the tenancy agreement, specified as non-smoking.
I mean, that's all our properties, as standard, are no smoking.
Can I ask the question then? If it's gone 10 years where the tenant stayed in the property and your agreement says you're not meant to be smoking in it, and they've gone 10 years and they've been smoking in it, is it negligent or is it just wear and tear?
It's negligent.
Yeah,
definitely. You're not meant to be smoking at all. All our properties are definitely. I would imagine everybody, but then I don't like to assume everybody has a no-smoking.
I've had somebody on TikTok, a positive comment on TikTok,
really?
For a change. Thoughts on tenants putting a pull-up bar in the door frame?
As long as it's one, you get these, they twist and extend, and it's purely just the pressure of it pushing against either side of the door frame. Yeah. That's fine. I wouldn't have a problem with that, because it doesn't really, it might leave a slight indentation. In terms of obviously fixing that to the door frame or screwing it in and things, definitely check with your landlord or your agent if you're allowed to do that. It's the same with TVs on walls, which is so popular now. Everybody wants a TV on the wall, but you need to check that you're allowed to do that and it's done professionally, and not just a botched job where you're pulling all the plaster off the wall, etc., and that you're in agreement that it gets put back to what it was prior to the tenancy.
Ali's actually just saying he's just moved to facilities and operations manager, and it's a great insight. Thank you very much. He was asking if it was a daily live. it's you just catch us when you catch us, Ali. So just when we go live on TikTok, you'll see. But if you want to follow the channels and you want to see all the content, everything's still on our YouTube channels, on Fife Properties YouTube channel, Fife Properties TV. So you'll see it on YouTube, and you'll see all the playlists for this as well. So you'll be able to look back and see stuff. Okay, let's get cracking.
Yeah. Sorry, Kevin, you were still. Yeah, I'll let you go on.
Yeah, so another one, again, quite a common one, especially at this time of the year, is mold from drying clothes on radiators, leaving bottles against tiles in wet areas, and not ventilating during showers and cooking. So, as I say, this time of the year is so bad for mold, and people don't quite have that understanding between what mold is and between condensation and actual water ingress. So, obviously, coming back, doing your inspections is going to be key here. Mold is something that has to be kept on top on. Has to be treated, and then it's easy to get rid of. Whereas if a tenant just leaves it, which some of them unfortunately like to do, it will just keep growing. So nipping it in the bud, doing your inspections, making sure your tenants are educated on the difference between condensation and actual water ingress, so you're not ending up with any issues at the end of your tenancy, and you can identify if the issue is water ingress, what's causing it, and get it rectified before it causes damage to your property.
It's probably the biggest bone of contention,
I was just going to say, this is such a big issue.
Especially with the media exacerbating the situation and making it worse and worse, and making it out as if every single condensation in a property is actually mold and people are going to die as a result of it. And it's like, it's not. And most of it's condensation, and it's down to normal. This is now I actually just double checked with the Association of Scottish Landlords, or the Scottish Landlords Association, SAL. And actually double check with them just to make sure every single time, because I like crossing the T's and dotting the I's and making sure I've just got the right rhetoric, and we're still up to date with the current legislation. We still understand the remit, and they actually said it's normal tenant duties for the tenant actually to wipe down any areas that are actually got condensation in the walls, and actually make good any condensation build-up. It's causing a wee bit of black spot mold. Now, black spot mold is generally caused by condensation build-up on hitting a wall, and it doesn't disappear because there's no flow of air behind it. Therefore, it's not damp, it's just condensation buildup, but it needs to be wiped down. But that's down to a normal tenant duty to do.
Yeah, it's amazing how many tenants will actually they'll just not touch it and leave it and let it build up. And it's like, why are you not wiping it down?
All my clothes have been destroyed in my wardrobe. But why on earth did you not just clean your wardrobe? It's like, why did you just
I have a dehumidifier pot in my wardrobe, and I vacuum my windows every single morning upstairs because there is condensation. So, and I've got older double glazed units here. They're the wooden frames, so they are really prone to it. So I vacuum them, Karcher, every morning before I go to work, make sure they're all condensation free, and I have a pot in my wardrobe. And it's all these little preventative things that means that I'm not having to wipe down mold spots from my windows or from the walls, because I keep on top of it. And when we do inspections as well, I keep a bottle of mold spray in the boot of the car. So if we ever do come across a tenant, I say to them, are you happy for me to spray this? And I will show you how easy it is to get rid of. Go get yourself a bottle.
It takes me back to my days in Durward Street when I first got my first flat. It's like that's all it ever was. It was just because you're lying in your bed and most of your condensation comes from your mouth, the vapor during the night, and you've got the doors closed and you've got the windows closed. Clearly, you should really have trickle vents open. You should have the windows open, but I can't stand it. Any noise and I stay awake. It's like a pin drops and it's like, what was that? So I keep everything closed. So therefore, when the water vapor hits the windows, which is cold, and it's obviously warm, it condensates straight away onto the windows and then drips onto the actual sills, like what you said, Kevin. And a lot of people, and I'm talking about just people, I'm not talking about tenants in general. A lot of people just leave it, and it's like it just sinks into the woodwork or sinks into the sills, and then it starts to cause damage over time. It's like, for God's sake, why do you not just wipe it up? And that's the type of negligence that we could be talking about, long-term damage as a result of not following just normal tenant duties. And before anybody pipes up or shouts out or anything like that, yes, we also have to follow normal landlord duties as well. Yeah.
So what you're right about the window sills and things, because timber window sills, I've seen them all too often sometimes be totally warped because the water's just sat on it and never been wiped down or cleaned up properly. And people need to do that in their own homes whether you're a tenant, whether you're a homeowner, do you know what I mean? Like you said, Kieran, you do it yourself, and it's just something. It's just good practice to keep your property in good condition. What instances are there where tenants aren't responsible, Kieran?
So obviously there is a lot of responsibility to a tenant. However, there are areas, like you said, that they are not responsible for. So this covers things such as damage by neighbouring homes, extreme weather, which we get quite a lot of here.
Which we're all too aware of.
Intruders, vandals, or a landlord's negligence. So it's wise to protect yourself with adequate insurance.
Yes, and Jim, you highlighted that.
What could be ideas of a landlord's negligence then? Just as a quick 2-minute.
So that's, for example, if you have reported water ingress to the property and the landlord has not done anything to rectify it, that is something that is going to continue to get worse. Same likes of a bath seal, something that's really easily fixed, just needs resealed, and that can cause quite a lot of damage as well. If the water is getting in there, you can have water marks on whichever room is below the bathroom, or just it'll rot underneath the bath as well. So these are little things that are down to a landlord to keep on top of, but also down to a tenant to report.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, that's when it comes in, like you highlight, Jim, there. If you are a tenant and you're reporting things, make sure you've got a record of it. If you are dealing with a reputable agent, they will also have a record of that. There was one we had recently, Karen, and I ended up, I was in the property and I noticed the water ingress. I thought, God, and the tenant had just left, and I'm like, that's quite bad. And I come back into the office and got Laura to check. I said, could you check through the record? And she's like, yeah, they reported that and the roof's been sorted and things. I was like, right, okay. It's just if they hadn't reported it, then that would fall back to the tenant, you know, because it was quite bad. But the roof repair had been done and it was all reported and things. It's just an ongoing issue. So then that's where I was trying to establish who's responsible here, because if that's not been reported.
So then we've established what counts as damage.
Yeah.
Then tell me then what counts as wear and tear.
So even with the most wonderful tenants and the best intentions, it's impossible to return a property exactly like you said with the car, Jim. It's impossible to return it exactly the same condition as it was in the check-in, particularly if tenants have been there for a few years. And after a few years, you need to take into consideration wear and tear. And of course, it does leave room for some grey areas, and that's where then it comes into debate. But here are some typical examples, and we're going to go through them, where wear and tear for landlords to accept just as part of daily life. And the first one for me is you'll see it all the time, especially after a tenancy has been running for a few years, is scuff marks on maybe the walls, or maybe around the skirting boards or the door fascias, particularly at entrance halls and high traffic areas, entrance halls, staircases, and landings and things as well. Sometimes loosening handles on the main doors at these areas as well. A wee bit wear and tear at thresholds between these doorways, and like I say, the odd dent and scratch on the wood, the woodwork, and possibly.
What about cats and dogs? What about cats and dogs?
Well, pets, Karen, I'll let you cover pets.
So if you have a pet in the property and it's causing damage, for example, they have scratched the pet has scratched the carpet, the door frame, has caused damage, that is negligence for it. Well, these things happen, but at the end of the day, it is then down to a tenant to rectify this. And if you don't throughout your tenancy, then you could have a claim against you at the end of the tenancy.
Yeah, I mean, we're all for tenants having pets, and that's not an issue as long as the landlord's on board. I mean, obviously that's all going to change soon anyway. Yeah. But I think it's all down to the tenant looking after the pet properly. A lot of tenants now are prepared to pay that wee bit extra on their deposit just to kind of safeguard for having the pet, because although you could be the best pet owner, pets could cause some damage, and that does not come under wear and tear. It's definitely damage. So
Again, it really comes back to this situation where if somebody's been in there for 10 years and they've got a pet, and the pet has continually scratched the door to get in, or continually scratched the bottom of the corner of the carpet. I only know that because I've got pets. that's the type of things they do. You have to get to them quick. So it can damage it. But do you think there is still an assumption that because they've been in so long that they're no liable for that?
Yeah, no, that's not the case.
Yeah, okay. That's good.
Yeah, definitely. If your pet's been damaged in the property, it's because you've not been looking after the pet or monitoring its behaviour, and that's down to the tenant's responsibility.
And it's good tenant duties because, you know, we have scratch posts right through our house to make sure that the cats actually get a good scratch at stuff. And obviously we leave some of the doors open so they can get in and out, some of the main places where they're going to come through the thoroughfare. And it is just keeping on top of that and vigilant to that. But we've only just replaced our carpets, and that was after a long time. And that's what they've done. They just continually just pulled up the corners all the time when they're at certain doors. And just catch them in time before they do that. So it's a good one to clarify that there's actually tenant negligence.
No, definitely is. Yeah, definitely. But as I
What
say,
about then we're on carpets then? When we talk about the carpets, how long should a carpet last?
now carpets. This is the one that always gets people, because, like I said, I mentioned at the beginning, when we have to make a claim for a carpet, a landlord most of the time expects to get a brand new carpet, and it's not. It's done in a percentage amount of the cost of the carpet to renew it. You don't get a whole new carpet. Carpets, the life of a carpet in the eyes of the deposit scheme is 5 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and carpets tend to deteriorate faster than maybe solid wood floors, or, you know, because they're being walked on, and they could be in high traffic areas. They sometimes pull away for the thresholds and things as well over time, and that's where it comes into the wear and tear factor.
How would Safe Deposit Scotland, this is the deposit agency,
Yeah.
and their adjudication panel, how would they view a situation, and it has happened before,
Yeah.
where a landlord has just put down a brand new carpet, and the tenant lays their iron on the floor and burns the carpet at one bit of that carpet, and then subsequently 6 months later moves out? How would they view that situation? The tenant's responsible to replace, because the carpet, you can't exactly just cow a corner or a bit, and you can't exactly expect the next person that moves in to have a burn in their carpet. So how would they view that? How would Safe Deposit Scotland view that? That's not us. How would they view that? Do you know?
Yeah, Kevin, we just covered this with them. I'll let you do this.
Yeah, so we just had training with Safe Deposit Scotland to keep up to date with all their regulations, everything that's all involved in the process. Now, it has always been the case when it comes to carpets, if you have the situation that you've just explained, Jim, new carpet, iron burnt down on it and made a mark, you will only be awarded a portion of the carpet cost. So they will divide that by the area effectively that has been damaged. So it is a bit unfair.
It's not right, is it? It's not right at all. This is where I would say the fallout between a landlord and the managing agent, the fallout happens, because Safe Deposit Scotland is the one driving this, the decision, and you as a letting agent have got no adjudication towards that. You can't argue that at all, because you said, wait a minute, we've just put a brand new carpet down. 6 months later, the tenant burns it, walks out the door, and you're still telling us they've only got to pay for a small part of that, and you're expecting the next tenant to move in with that burning the carpet.
Yeah, I mean, for example, say you put a new carpet down and it was £300, for example. Your likelihood, if it's got a burn on it, you're going to get maybe £40 to £60 back. Just as a
that's
wrong.
Wrong,
yeah,
that's wrong, but that's Safe Deposit Scotland, and it's not just Safe Deposit Scotland. That's the way the custodial schemes run in Scotland. That's the way they all run. My Deposit's exactly the same. They all have that as their thing, and that's driven by the government, the Scottish government, and their rhetoric and how they view things in the legal system. So while you can see I'm getting pretty annoyed about it, but while I'm really annoyed about it, there's nothing I can do about it as a landlord. There's nothing you can do about it as a letting agent either.
Yeah, I know, and they are there for the reason, and they are really good to have that third party, obviously impartial to obviously the relationship between us, the agent, and the landlord and the tenant to make that decision. Sometimes it's not always viewed as fair, but that's the way it is, unfortunately. So
okay, so that then brings us on. We're talking about carpets. What about solid wood floors and stuff like that? What about your laminate flooring?
Yeah, because as I say, obviously cheap laminate flooring and things like they're quite notorious and prone for chipping. I don't like the cheap laminate flooring. They're not really durable enough for a tenancy, and like we say, the hardwood floors and things obviously stand the test of time. But yeah, I would stay away from cheap laminate floorings with this. They've got a very, very thin laminate on top of quite that's quite it's not the best wood. As
Do you know what I think they're
landlord.
good for though? Do you know what I think they're really good for? If you've put a cheap laminate flooring, you're buying a house with cheap laminate flooring, they're a great bed to put a carpet right on top of.
Yeah, and we've
They're
had that.
perfect for that.
Before,
That's
yeah.
what I love about it. The amount of people that come
To
in
give you
and
that
say,
even
I should maybe just take up that flooring when I go to see people to sell their houses. I should maybe just take up that flooring and then just put a carpet down. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. That's a perfect base to put a carpet on top of. That's a perfect base to put lino on top of. It's perfectly flat. Just leave it where it is and put it on and just take a wee bit off the bottom of the door if you have to. And it works very, very well. So that's what I love about possible laminate. Laminate's not the greatest for me personally as a landlord when it's an upstairs flat, especially if it's over somebody's bedroom, because you can cause real problems with antisocial behaviour between two people upstairs and downstairs. And so that would be my top tip as a landlord or as an investor. With my experience I've got over the years, to avoid, don't put laminate flooring above somebody's bedroom downstairs if you've got flats.
Yeah. Karen, we spoke about like ventilation and obviously the damage where it's classed as damage when you're not reporting mold and things like that and condensation. What about in a wear and tear situation? If there's not maybe ventilation, the proper ventilation provided, or how would that work?
So obviously, if you're not providing adequate ventilation in kitchens and bathrooms, you can expect mold to build up. So it's going to affect, obviously, it'll grow on the grout, the ceiling, and the ceilings, along with flaking paintwork as well. So none of these things are things that you want to be doing.
Without a proper extractor fan in the bathroom, you're going to see the ceiling is going to start flaking. It's going to start showing mold, and also that's why we all, like Jim and yours, we always put in cooker hoods and the extractor fan so that you've got that ventilation for when cooking and things.
This is why I've got no hair left, because I keep tearing my hair out when I see it every single time. When you see it on the landlord channels and on the forums, and every single time people they put a picture of their bathroom ceiling or their kitchen ceiling, and they sit and say, why has it got all this black spot on it and everything? What's going on there? And I'm like, that's emulsion paint. It's like you're meant to use vinyl silk.
Yeah.
Vinyl silk is for kitchens and bathrooms. It is watertight, therefore you can just wipe it down. Yeah. It looks glossy when it goes on, but that's what it's for. Or you just put the the cladding up, which is which is a lot more expensive. Yeah, I'd rather just put the vinyl silk on. So for God's sake, put vinyl silk on your ceilings and your walls and bathrooms and kitchens if you have to. Stop putting matte emulsion.
Yeah,
that's what's causing the problem. All your blooming mold and everything hitting in the top corners and just staying in your paint flaking off as well, eh?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to wear and tear as well, now I'm just going to finally on wear and tear. Cleaning. Now, cleaning is an entirely separate subject to wear and tear, just to clear that up with people. And tenants should always be returning your property as clean as when they received it. So cleaning if you get your property handed over to you clean, you return it back to the landlord or agent as clean as it was.
So this goes back to what you were saying, Karen, and what you were saying, Richard, about your day-to-day cleaning duties and just making sure everything's done as it should. Just like you have, when you give, personally for me as a landlord, when I give somebody a home, or when you guys give somebody a home on their behalf, or a house, I would say, I'll call it a house. When I give somebody a house or a flat or an apartment, I expect them to make it a home. And as normal homely duties, as a tenant duties would do, or any homeowner duties, you would clean your home. But for some reason, some people, very few, actually view a rental home as a completely different proposition than having your own home at your own. Mm-hmm. It's a weird thing in the mind. I've often seen that. People I've had in the past, just personally when I managed myself, my own stock. It's like they've treated their home like a tip. And yet they'll move to their brand new house they move to their brand new house that they brought, and it's pristine.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Oh, I don't get it.
Yeah. There's we've seen that in the past, and that's just the way some people are, unfortunately. But let's have a wee chat about how we could actually minimise the risk of damage in a property. And obviously, the happiest landlords are those who have the least hassle from either maybe regular maintenance call-outs or things breaking down or dealing with damages after tenants move out. If you're one of those landlords, then you're very lucky because at some point you will experience some sort of, it's just part of the industry. And I think if you're a landlord with several properties, you'll be all too familiar, as you are, Jim, over the years, that it happens. But so it's wise, and you'll be wise to this as well, Jim, that you could take a few precautionary measures at the start of the tenancy or before the start of the tenancy, and that could make the property all that more durable, and an all more durable place for people to live throughout the tenancy. So we'll cover some of them just now. And I think, as we just said about fixtures and fittings and things, use decent fittings. Now, it doesn't need to be really expensive ones, but cheap blinds and taps and carpets and door handles and locks and appliances and everything will malfunction and break over time. So even if you won the case, you'll still spend dreary times sorting it all out if you've got cheap, low cost fixtures and fittings in a property.
What other things have we got to
won't
think about,
stand
though?
the test of time.
Karen, what other things do you have to think about then, if that's the case? When you come to the, minimising the risk.
So obviously avoiding delicate fittings and finishings like glossy lacquered radiators and taps, cheap laminate flooring, which we've covered, and high maintenance surfaces. These all take into effect, obviously, minimising that risk in the first place for it. Don't put cheap products in and then wonder why they've broken or need replaced.
Or why they don't stand the test of time.
And it makes it easier for your tenant to look after your property as well and keep their deposit by ending them by reducing mold, caring for their appliances, and removing shoes at the door. This is one that I always get at viewings as well when people come in. I've had that literally just this week. The landlord had all the carpets shampooed, the property's lovely, ready to go. Very rainy day.
This is why we chose to put
for viewings. Got a nice little bit of laminate as soon as you come in the door, so nice and low maintenance, and people not taking their shoes off and having to be asked.
Well, that's exactly what it is. This is why in the apartments we chose to put maybe cord carpet at the front door. So cord carpet for about maybe 1.5 meters to 2 meters. And then the real carpet started after that. So at least the cord carpet, which is basically somewhere to wipe their feet and put their boots and all the rest of it before they actually physically got into the carpet itself. And this is why we understood that firmly. And it's like what you say as well, when you have an entrance vestibule, make sure it's tiled or make sure it's got a carpet or a brush carpet like cord, or make sure it's got even vinyl at even vinyl at the front's a good one as well, isn't it? Because vinyl's easily washable. That's probably the best one. Vinyl with maybe just a mat to wipe your feet on as you come in the door. So that's easily washable as well. And then just put a door bar right across halfway, about 1.5 meters to 2 meters in, and then carpet from then on in the hallway. And that just keeps it nice and clean. It also sets a precedent, I think, personally for me, with the tenant. And the fact that this is what you expect them to do.
This is how we want it looked after. It's also, Karen, you touched on it earlier as well about showing people how to use like the right mold spray to use and how to wipe things. It's all about educating people as well. And it's at the beginning saying, like, this is what you do, and this, or even if it's working certain appliances or how to care for something, educate them at the beginning, and you set that tone for the duration of the tenancy. Like, this is what our expectation is.
It's also when carrying out regular inspections comes into force, because you're making sure the tenants are looking after the property, you're catching any problems early, you can alert the tenant when they are making mistakes, things such as that, not keeping on top of areas which they should be, and it also catches minor repairs before they become major ones and costly ones at that as well.
This does go a lot back to this does go a lot back to picking the right tenant, though, doesn't it? This goes right back to getting the right tenant in the first place.
Yeah.
And somebody will more than likely look after the property. And you can tell that at the interview stage, can't you?
Yeah, definitely.
That's the thing, that one that I just done the viewings that we had 3 really good applications in for it. And I mean, all of them would have been good on paper, but I was able to say to the landlord, this is the person that gave me a good impression at the viewing. Not that the others didn't as well, but that was the one that I got the best impression from. Took their shoes off when they came in, was very pleasant, very polite, was early as well, always a good show that they've got good time management. And so that was the person that they've decided to go with, because we had 3 really good people on paper and you could have picked out of any of them, but that impression at the viewing was the thing that took that person to the successful stage of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about that yesterday, about obviously the importance of referencing and finding the right people in the beginning. We're currently looking after a property that we took over about a year ago, and it was somebody that was in place as part of that as part of that portfolio, and they've been quite difficult to get access and all the rest of it. But she's subsequently left, and now we understand why she wouldn't let us in, because she's not been looking after it. But it wasn't her tenant, and obviously what we do as a process to find a tenant hasn't been done with when choosing that person.
This then goes back a lot to appearance, doesn't it? And the fact that, and this is what I've taught from the very beginning, is the fact that, you know, they could turn up in the best suit possible, but if their health doesn't look great, if their appearance doesn't look great, you know,
there's a few telltale signs.
You can know straight away, and I'm not going to say it on a public forum how you can these telltale signs, but we all know what these telltale signs are. And a row of condemned houses. A row of condemned houses is an appropriate sign straight away to avoid that person, because there is a problem. If they can't, genuinely, if the person in front of you can't look after their own health and their self, they're not going to be able to look after their house like you expect them to look after as well. I mean, that's just a time-tested, you know, experience and wisdom thing. I've actually tried to dispel and think, no, it can't be that. And the amount of money and the thousands, the tens of thousands I've lost, you know, just trying to say it, it can't be that. It can't be as simple as that. It is as simple as that.
Yeah. Impressions in person are a big part of the referencing process. When we were talking, I've seen Drew has jumped in there with what about the upkeep of the garden areas, and I was about to just pick up on when we touched on inspections there. That's a good point, where you could pick up on the external of the property, and that's obviously the perimeter walk, the gardens, the gutters, the roof. Do you know, have that look around the property for water ingress, make sure obviously the garden's been maintained. And I mean, you don't need to be, you know, green fingered and things. You just need to make sure that the property has been cut back and maintained and de-weeded to a reasonable level, and it should be returned as it was handed over as well, and that would all be in your inventory as well. So a good point, Drew, about gardens and external areas. They are just as important as inside as well.
Yeah, can I say a big shout out to Ali? Thanks very much for the gift on TikTok, by the way, and it does go to charity.
Yeah, that's good. And then finally, on the risk for damage or minimising the risk for damage, we've already touched on it, but take out insurance. Now, as a landlord, obviously have a landlord's insurance, but as a tenant as well, have your own contents insurance. This will cover you for any costs that exceed, for a landlord's perspective, this will cover you for costs that exceed the security deposit or are not the responsibility of the tenant. So that's obviously things like weather damage, break-ins, theft. You need to have the right insurance in place. Jim, we've just obviously been through that process with a really good insurance provider, and that all worked out well. And that was a combination of, I think it was like a break-in, a fire, and
that was some hit for the insurance.
It was everything rolled into one.
I think I had I not just changed to them or something like that.
We had just
changed to them.
A matter of months we'd changed over
to that insurer, and then all of a sudden it was like, we've got a claim for about what, £25,000. It's like, I've got to admit, it was happy days for me, because I thought, woohoo, a refurb.
Yeah.
Well, a refurb, fantastic, and loss of rent as well. So the occupancy rate was literally the occupancy rate from the break-in, and you were good at that, Richard. You actually made sure the occupancy rate was right from the break-in and the damage it was done and the repair it was done as well. With the loss of rent, I think we only lost 1 week's rent out of that.
7 days or something. Yeah, it was 1 week.
1 week's rent. That's phenomenal when you think about it, because I think it was 9 months to get that over the line. And actually get it all rectified. And the loss adjuster argued with you vigorously about how the fact that no, it should only be this amount, and you should be taking a hit for this and a hit for that. And it's like, no, we're not taking a hit for anything. Your liability is to pay for this and to pay for that, and we're expecting you to pay for that.
Where they tried to catch me was the period of time from when the incident happened until work commenced or got underway. But obviously I don't have any control over contractors' availability and their time and ordering materials and everything like that. So that's where, but we got there in the end.
I've got to think about, though, when as a landlord, you think about, if you don't have the right letting agent, I think most letting agents would have just let that go and said, well, that's the insurance. I'm not responsible for, project managing that. What has it got to do with me? It's like, it's up to you. And anybody with without that knowledge and expertise, would have just let that go and potentially lost. I think potentially with the argument as well about the fact that they didn't want to pay for some of the stuff that was to get done and the kitchen and stuff. And it's like, oh, well, you could just tart it up in the very beginning. It could have cost me about an extra £8,000 or something like that. So that's why it's important to have somebody project managing it who actually has the knowledge and expertise in order to see that through when it comes to it. So that pays. That pays. That's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
You're not getting a pay rise, by the way.
Yeah, it was a good result.
I had to put that on the record just in case.
I need to obviously make people aware, though. Tenants are liable for damages and breakages in a property, whether that's accidental or whether it's deliberate. But if you supply fittings and things that are not up to the job, and they do not stand the test of time, then the cost of the repair for that is up to you as the landlord. So, what next, Karen? Let's talk about claims.
I think just coming back to kind of what Jim's just covered with his insurance claim. I mean, it's all about having the right person place to get all the information that you need and do the process correctly. So this covers obviously what you need for a valid claim. So to make a successful claim against the tenant for damages, you need to meet specific criteria to show that you've suffered a loss and have the right of reimbursement. So one of the key things I will highlight here is, I think we will cover this, but as a landlord or an agent, you are the one that is responsible for demonstrating the loss, the damage. The deposit is the tenant's unless you can prove otherwise.
Yes,
that is why you need a valid claim here. So an inventory signed by the tenant, ideally on every page at the start of the tenancy, with accompanying photos, videos, along with a signed report from your regular inspector. So an inventory is one of the key things. Basically, without one these days, you do not have a claim against the deposit. Now, this is something that has to be done either at the day or two before the tenancy, if not on the day itself. It has to be, as I've just covered, photos, descriptions, ideally need to be time and date stamped as well. There is a lot that goes into an inventory, and having an independent clerk to do that can be the way forward. We have had a lot of landlords over time that have tried to do their own ones. And whilst they make a valiant attempt, it's just not something that will hold up if they do need to go through a claim against the deposit for it. So making sure you have an inventory that meets the requirements is one of the key things. You cannot just have a list of paper with what's in the property and that it's clean.
I used to, as a landlord, and I used to think I could save money by actually not getting an inventory done, or possibly just doing a video walkthrough myself with my camera. It's like, oh, I'll just do a video walkthrough, or I'll get one bit of A4 paper and I'll just list what I've got, and I'll just get the tenant to sign it at the bottom. But I now realise with the advent of the deposit scheme and the way it works and the way the adjudication system works to get your money back at the end, or to try and get any deductions of the deposit, you better make sure you've got a wind and watertight inventory report. And that's where it comes down to, is exactly what you guys are saying. It's like you have to just spring for the cost out now, because the cost of an inventory is probably about 100, maybe 150, depending on what you're doing. But the key here is you're not going to be doing that every single time. The tenant's going to be in there for a long time, and you might just need a refresh for when they move out and move in again. And it might not need to get done in full again. You know, I don't know what your thoughts are about it, but I don't see the necessary need to do it if everything's exactly the same as before.
Yeah, I know that's a bit of a grey area.
So it has changed a lot since I started doing it anyway. It was back, you could reuse inventories. You could, if the property was still in a similar condition, if the tenant hadn't been in too long, you could reuse it. That is not the case now. You need a new inventory every single tenancy. So, but like you say, for the sake of, for example, £100, even if you're needing the property cleaned by a professional cleaner, that's probably going to cost you over £100 anyway. So having your inventory is key here. And
you're never going to get that if you don't have the inventory. So you're never going to get it from the tenant, are you?
Yeah,
so
you will not
you're going to
have
the inventory in order to get it. You're going to have the inventory in order to get the money from their deposit if there's a valid claim. And if you don't have the inventory, you've not got a leg to stand on.
Exactly. And you have to prove that the damage was caused by your tenant or someone that they're responsible for, like a friend, a pet, even a delivery person.
Yeah. I mean,
what's your thoughts on me or as a landlord maybe doing the inventory myself? and
It
passing it
would
on to
take
you.
you a lot of time to do what is actually required for it, and it's weighing up whether your time
What is
is
actually required? What is actually required for an inventory?
So the inventory has to be a detailed document, as I say, done ideally the day or two before the tenant moves into the property. It has to have pictures of everything, basically, right down to the walls. It should cover the condition of the paint, whether it's freshly painted, if it's had a clean. The wording is also very particular as well. So if a property is being cleaned, has it been cleaned to a professional standard? Has it been cleaned to a domestic standard? Is it a high domestic standard? Is it a low one? There is so many different technicalities that go into it, including like meter readings as well, the condition of the garden. So it's very much, do you want to spend your time doing a report, which can easily be at least 50 pages long, ideally?
So I've got Frankie from Safe Deposit Scotland here on TikTok, and he says an inventory, or maybe she says actually. Yep, she. Sorry, Frankie. I realise it's an IE at the end.
Frankie's who done a training, Jim.
Yeah, well, there you go. So Frankie has actually been on the training for Fife Properties anyway, from Safe Deposit Scotland. An inventory is fundamental to any claim except rent. And that's right from the horse's mouth, Safe Deposit Scotland.
Frankie's brilliant. Frankie's been a letting agent herself as well. She's really in the know. And it's true what you say, Karen, and it's right down to even time stamping and the terminology that you use in an inventory, clear descriptions, clear pictures, and that all set out in a document, and it can run into up to 50 pages depending on the property. So to do it yourself as a landlord, really, for the sake of 100 or 100 and odd pounds, please don't use your own time, your own precious time, doing something like that when you could have somebody, a third party, independently do that. And that will really safeguard you as best you can in the event of making a claim.
And not only an inventory is an important document, but your tenancy agreement is something you will need if you're going through a deposit claim. So you should have in your tenancy agreement, it should cover the type of loss that you're trying to recoup, and it should allow you to take that. That will allow you to take it from the security deposit, providing it is specified in your tenancy agreement. And this is where many off-the-shelf contractors fall short.
Yeah.
But this is where the evidence that allows the loss to be worked out in money terms. So this is where you need all your supporting documents. Not only do you need your inventory tenancy agreement, but you need things such as initial receipts, quotes, current price for equivalent replacement, or estimate for any labour. So you cannot just say, I want £100 for a clean. You have to have either a quote or an invoice to demonstrate this is how much it's going to cost. Likewise, for any other replacements that you're doing, you have to have the paperwork, receipts to back this up as well.
Here's an important thing to remember as well, and you need to bear in mind that your claim can be rejected if you request the amount that benefits you more than if the damage had never happened. And this is where this is called betterment. You need to watch out for this. So tenants are liable for what they have broken. Tenants are liable for what they've broken and not the cost of upgrades to the property. So if they break something in the property or damage something and it's to be fixed back to its current state or as close to that, if you try and claim for something at a cost where something's going to be upgraded and in a better condition, that comes under betterment, and they will not.
Let me give you an absurd example. The tenant completely destroys your new oven that you've installed, but it's not a fan-assisted oven. You then decide to replace it with a fan-assisted oven, which costs a lot more money. As a result, you can't claim the cost of the new fan-assisted oven. It's only what the original oven would cost.
Yeah. So that's something you need to. So and that's a misconception which some landlords fall out to, like, oh well, I'll just get a better oven this time. Well, that's fine, but you'll have to pay the difference. You'll get the cost amount that is equivalent to the oven that was there. Do you know? But you're not going to get to put a better oven in place. So yeah, it's called betterment, and it's a really important thing to remember.
So how this then makes me ask the question then: how does the damage claims process actually work?
Do you want to take this, Kim?
Yes, so before you start a claim, remember that covering the costs is not about blaming or shaming. And how you communicate with your tenants can be the difference between a swift resolution and a lengthy conflict. Now, the deposit claim process can be very lengthy. very. So
It
if
could
you
be,
manage to handle this smoothly, resolve it with your tenants nice and amicably, it can be a nice swift turnaround, or it can be a lengthy process where you are needing ample documentation, ample time to do so. So, however, if you can't resolve things amicably after 30 days of the tenancy ending, these are the steps to making a claim. So the first one is ask the deposit protection provider to appoint an independent adjudicator. The onus will always be on the landlord to prove loss, so provide as much evidence as you can. So this is the key point here. It is the landlord to prove the loss. So you have to have all your evidence. So your inventory, your sign-out report, which should have descriptions and pictures also, and should be compared against the initial inventory. The
This then makes me
adjudicator will
ask,
review all the evidence
this
and
then,
liaise with the
just
tenant as well.
wait a minute now, Karen, this then pops into a question in my mind about, you know, as a letting agent, for example, and even as a landlord, is there an argument at some point in time with the amount of time you're going to have to spend on this trying to claim 30 quid on your deposit? There comes a time where you think you just let it go.
There are certain instances, yeah, where it's like, is this really worth all the back and forward?
Yeah.
If it's a really small amount. And also,
but then how does a landlord who uses a letting agent overcome that? Because I'll guarantee you a landlord will be going, what am I paying for then? And it's like, but then wait a minute, when you signed up, and I'm going to argue for both sides here.
Yeah.
When you signed up 5 years ago with us, that was your management fee. Now we've got to do a whole lot more work, and you're expecting that to be included now. Yeah. How on earth does a letting agent actually run? Because I've noticed a lot of agents are actually getting to the point where they're having to say, I'm going to have to charge for inspections now. I'm going to have to charge for if you want to argue about the deposit, because these weren't agreements that we had in the very beginning. You signed up to, and we can't afford to do that anymore because the running costs of agencies has actually gone up considerably. Cost of living, everybody thinks it's just them, when in actual fact it's everyone.
It's a combination of things, Jim, because as legislation and things change, we have to adapt. We have to retrain continuously. Like I've just said, we're just retrained. We have to take the time to obviously actually carry out inspections and do these types of things, and the resource and time and training, and just there's a combination of things that just all factor in. And a lot of letting agents will be the same. And like you say, costs of everything across the board have increased. And we have found ourselves in a position where, like a lot of other agents, we do so much for the landlord and that whole process. And it's going to have to obviously change, because we are spending so much time keeping up with what a landlord, if they were self-managed, would have to do.
So then it brings me back to the point that there is a point in time where if a landlord has got a £450, £500 a month property, and they're paying you maybe even 10%, 12% or whatever that is, the effort and time involved in that is going to come to the point if they want you to do everything and they don't expect you to charge them for it and just include it in that fee. There's going to come a point in time where you turn around to them and say, we can't afford to have you anymore. You'll just have to go somewhere else. Yeah,
that will definitely be the case as time goes on, because it's doing so much stuff, and the everything that's involved. Just we can't obviously keep up with the cost of things if it is involved in inspections and all the new legislation that we've.
This is why I believe a lot of letting agents will have to consolidate in the future. They'll have to consolidate into bigger agencies, and that's purely for the fact that the running costs are disproportionate for a smaller letting agent as opposed to the bigger letting agents, because spread it over more the overheads over more of a cost base.
I've seen it already. I've seen smaller agents amalgamate into other agents and because obviously, and it's all down to the running costs.
Yeah, Frankie's actually saying that. She's seen that more and more across the whole of Scotland. And they would obviously see that as Safe Deposit Scotland. They've got all the agencies, and they'll obviously be transferring it to the other agencies as a result of that.
Yeah, definitely.
So back to how does the damage claims process work? You know, where are we with this then? You know, I obviously interjected and spoke about who actually pays for this, and we've covered that nicely. I think we've covered that in good detail, and people should understand this is an encumbrant cost on letting agencies as well now, and possible landlords as well. If you're a one landlord, again, this is where we're going to see a huge consolidation maybe in the landlords as well. You know, if you're one landlord, which is 94% of the landlord population, if you've got one property, one landlord, 94% according to the Scottish Government in the 2040 housing bill, you know, they said that information back in 2019, 2020, and that's still true today. That mix hasn't really changed. So if you're one landlord, 94% of the landlord population have one property in Scotland. Why waste your time with this anymore? What is the point? It's like, and this then leads me on to believe, you know, more and more landlords are going to have to use letting agents because it's becoming so encumbrant. And you don't want the landlord to leave the sector, but you need to reward the landlord adequately for the capital that they're putting into the property. We're getting into dynamics here, obviously, the rent return and all the rest of it. Because it's like, why would I want to just invest my money for all the hassle to get 2%? I could just put it in an ISA and actually get that return and have it's a no-brainer. And
you're absolutely right. And I think as time goes on, and even as we are just at the moment, I think that everything that's involved for a self-managed landlord, and if they've just got one property, it doesn't make sense for them to do it on their own. And in true time, it will be to get a letting agent to do it. And Jim, you've voiced your opinion on the fact that further down the line, it'll probably be that people might be forced to use a letting agent rather than be a landlord in their own right because of the legislation changes and keeping things.
Yeah, the legislation changes are getting so draconian that you know, every landlord just doesn't have the time to learn all this. And I think further down the road, the Scottish Government will turn around and say every single landlord will either have to be qualified to some sort of minimum standard, which they aren't, by the way. So they have to be qualified to minimum standard, or they will have to use a letting agent who is qualified on their behalf. I think that will come eventually.
Yeah. As we talk about the claim process and the deposit protection agencies, now they do really push for an amicable resolution to be made between the agent, landlord, and the tenant. And you do need to allow your tenant that initial opportunity to go back and rectify anything that you've picked up on the exit inspection. Failing that, as you said, Karen, it will go to adjudication. So tell us a bit about the adjudication process.
Yeah, so the adjudicator will review the evidence and liaise with your tenant. They usually give a decision within a month. While you can, I'm trying to think of the right word for this, you can make a request for the decision to be reviewed, but this is only going to be successful if there has been an error within the law of the case. So this is not.
So they're
just
showing,
you're not happy with the decision. It has to be an effective.
So they're following the simple procedure and the letter of the law as well, which is actually the court adjudication process. They're following the same tact. You can only appeal if there's been an error in the law itself.
You
can't appeal just because you think it's unjust.
And then this is the final legally binding decision that can only be challenged in court. So if you do wish to take things further, you can claim up to 5,000 in the small claims court if you have a property in England or Wales, or it is the simple procedure in Scotland.
It's true, the first tier. Yeah.
So higher amounts are claimed through the court. The county court in England and Wales are the civil court, which is Sheriff's Court in Scotland, but you will need a solicitor to do this.
Which is what I'm having to do with some of my tenancies. You know, the very fact that, you know, there are a lot higher amounts as a result of that. Because I take, just me personally, not Fife Properties, but I give people a lot of leeway, and I obviously believe that people can right themselves if given the opportunity. Unfortunately, my aspirations and the what actually happens in in real life don't match each other, and it often ends up with me having to take the hit.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. Definitely.
One of the things that I touched on before is obviously just remember that the tenant's deposit remains their money until an agreement or a judgment is made, and it is illegal to hold on to any more than the amount of your claim.
Yeah,
it's
that's
also
such an important part.
To have the deposit in a deposit protection scheme. So another good one to keep in mind.
Yeah, that security deposit is the tenant's money unless at the end you have reason to prove otherwise. So please bear that in mind. And I think with that today, I think the question for everybody would be, are you protected against deposit damages through your deposit by your tenant. I mean, you really need to think about that. If you own a rental home and you're unsure and would like maybe a simple check over of things, then please feel free to come to myself direct. My direct number and my email and things are in the blog attached to this show. So feel free to reach out, guys, if anything that we've discussed today you're unsure about, or maybe if it's not something you're familiar with and you're managing property, then you really need to speak to somebody to get yourself up to speed, because it could be a minefield if you're not aware or got the knowledge to deal with that type of situation.
Finally, I think Drew had actually mentioned there, just to cover Drew's question about what about the upkeep of the garden areas? Normal tenant duties, isn't it?
Yeah, and I touched on Drew's comment, and it's as you need to maintain the garden, and as I say, you don't need to be extensively green fingered, and as long as the lawns are kept tidy, weeds are kept at bay, and and it's kept tidy and returned as it was handed over.
I think for a lot of people, and this is just speaking from a personal point of view, over all the years and experience I've had as being a landlord and also being an investor and also being a next door neighbour to people that I've rented before, it's you often tend to put your own perspective of how you would look after your garden onto the other person. And it's like, we don't all use garden gnomes, by the way. We don't all have a wee pond with a fountain coming out of it. And there's a different way, it's how you say, it's like the cleanliness of your house.
Yeah, everybody has their own.
Everybody has standards of cleanliness in a house, but the reality is, as long as I get the house back how I gave you it, minus normal wear and tear, I'm not bothered how you live in between. As long as you're not antisocial, you pay your rent and you don't damage the property. That's the three things that tick all my boxes as an investor and a landlord, and that's the three things that should tick any boxes.
Yeah,
so the reality is, as long as the garden's clean and tidy, and it's not it's like, oh my god, the grass is 6 inches instead of half an inch.
Yeah,
it's the middle of winter, it's pouring in rain. There's no way anybody's going to be able to cut the grass. So how is that possible to do that? But people still tend to want to have a go about that for some reason. So that's probably my perspective on how I see the world in terms of how I see it. I don't know if anybody sees it like that as well, but that's, it is normal tenant duties to do that, to upkeep the garden. But it is often a place that's neglected, especially in shared in shared gardens or flats. Yeah, because it's like everybody else thinks everybody else should do it, or is going to do it, or everybody else thinks everybody else is, and the only reason I know this is because I lived in there. I've lived in that situation before. Everybody else thinks everyone else it's their turn to cut the grass, because I've done it all before for everybody. So why are they not doing it? But they don't actually tell them.
Yeah,
they just assume they're going to do it.
Yeah, they assume. Yeah, definitely, and it's like you say, Jim. You can't micromanage how people live on a day-to-day basis, and you shouldn't be set out to do. If you're set out to try and do that as a landlord or an agent, even, then that's wrong. People need to live, and if people are a wee bit messy as they live day to day, then that's fine. That's how they live, and as long as the property has not been damaged and it's handed back.
Yeah. Ali makes a good point though, and I'll just say that he says, when you have a situation like that, you could obviously, and you could say to them, look, I tell you what, for a fortnightly fee, we'll just get that done if you pay us. So you guys don't need to bother it and don't need to do it.
We have a lot of tenancies like that where there's gardeners in place, and the tenants are more than happy to have that because it takes that away, the responsibility away for them, and you've got that agreement in place. Definitely.
Especially for gardens as well.
Especially goes on to say, especially with working families, and possibly try to encourage the tenants to actually sign up to that sort of agreement before they actually take the property. That will give you a great idea what type of person they are then. If they're actually going to look after it, or if they say, no, I will do it. Okay, great stuff. You will do it. That's fine. So
some people choose to and are quite avid gardeners and things. And no, I'll do the garden, and you're like, that's fine. But we have a lot that have gardeners in place, and they are working families, and they don't have the time to really maintain it as it should be, especially if they're big gardens. Got one that I could come to mind that's in Upper Largo, and the back garden's massive, and it's got a gardener because it got even like. I don't know who would tackle that or have the time to tackle it.
Some landlords though actually say to them, I've seen it before, and you know that, we'll just get the garden done anyway, and you don't need to pay for it. because they want to make sure their garden's actually kept in the right condition, because their intention eventually is possible to move back into it later on. Or they've spent so much time on it and they know what effort's been put into it. If you just leave that, it'll just decay to nothing, and you'll never get it rectified back to what it was until you spend thousands and thousands of pounds. So that prevention rather than cure is the option there when it comes to gardening.
We've got one up in Daresey where the guys come and do all the trees and the bushes and all the rest of it, and it's the landlord that covers that, because they know that it's a big task to undertake, and that gets done once or twice a year, I think.
But it is, like you say, Jim, the prevention is better than the cure for it. And it comes back to kind of what we've covered today, and just making sure that you're taking these preventative measures, like having your inventory, having your sign out report, and making sure that you do have an understanding as to wear and tear and what betterment is as well. So you're avoiding yourself potentially distressing and long deposit claim at the end of the tenancy.
Yeah, and it's good. As a landlord and investor, thanks very much for clarifying this for me, because I'm more aware now of the current situation. I'm more aware of the fact that the courts and the first tier tribunal system and the safe deposit system are in more control than we actually think we could influence at all, or a letting agent can influence at all. It's really down to understanding that as an investor and a landlord, which will allow you to build your portfolio a lot bigger, rather than actually getting caught in the minutiae of arguing over minor technicalities. A classic example the other day is, I had my solicitor come back to me and say, do you know it's going to cost £650? They're wanting to put another liability insurance on this 30 properties that you're buying. And I'm like, I couldn't care less, just let them get on with it. It's 650 quid, I'm buying 30 properties. I'm not going to argue over 650 quid at this point in time to get it over the line in the next half an hour.
I know.
See what I mean, though? How people can get dragged into that
and a different perspective,
and let it take control of them completely. I says, get it over the line first, then I'll put a complaint and I'll get my money back.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for clarifying that, and coming on. Final words from you guys, because this isn't the me that should be talking.
Yeah, as I was saying, if anybody watching has any questions, or if you're managing or self-managing, and a lot of that didn't resonate with you or made you quite like, I didn't know that, then feel free to reach out to me and have a chat. I'd be happy to have a discussion about what the correct procedures are. And I think not even just for landlords, for tenants as well, having the third party involved. If you're a tenant and you feel that you're having a claim against you that's unjust, then as long as you could prove otherwise, then you should be fine. So it works both ways. It's not all just the landlord. It's the tenant and the landlord, and that's what that process is there for. Yeah.
Just understanding the process for it is the key point here. Whether you are a landlord or a tenant, a deposit protection scheme is there to protect both parties within this and make an unbiased decision. So making sure that if you're a landlord going through a claim and it is justified, you have all the right information that you need there. Or likewise with a tenant that is going through a claim that is unjustified as well, that you understand the process for a deposit claim.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for your input, Karen. Obviously, always appreciated. And Jim, your perspective as obviously an agent and an investor and landlord yourself, it's good to get that the flip side of it. And to everybody that's joined in this morning with questions and things, thanks as always for keeping it interactive. And that's us. We're finished for today. I will be doing the Wealth Creation Show on Monday, Jim. I'm doing 5 Keys to Rise in 2024, so join me then 12:30 on Monday. And until then, I'll see you guys later, and thanks for joining.
Bye.